Hi, it's Paul here from selfoutforlife.com, and today I'm going to talk about the 12 common thinking traps that steal your happiness. So a thinking trap is when you perceive reality differently to how it really is, and that results in you feeling negative and pessimistic in some way. So we've got the reality in the world, but the way we think about it is distorting it in some way. And the technical term for this is cognitive distortions. Your cognitions are basically your thoughts, perceptions, your beliefs and values, and basically how you interpret the world. And I often call these TFB loops. That's thoughts, feelings and behaviors. So we have a thought, that generates a feeling, and that then generates some kind of behavior or action. So let's get into these 12 common thinking traps or cognitive distortions. So the first one is called AllorNothing Thinking, also known as black or white thinking. So this is thinking in extremes, either something being really, really good or absolutely terrible. There's no middle ground. There's no in-betweens. And an example could be, and this is a real example I heard recently in a hypnotherapy session, is I am a complete failure as a mother. So this is someone who'd come for some help with anxiety, and this came up, and her son had been very difficult, and so she came up with this belief that I am a complete failure as a mother. Now the reality of that is there's lots of things that could influence how a child could grow up besides the mother. I mean, there's the father, there's friends, there's teachers at school, all those other kind of things. So that's just not true. That statement. Another one is I am a total loser. So maybe you've just done something wrong, you've made a mistake, and you say to yourself, I'm a total loser. Again, not true. It's just going to a real extreme, a real black and white approach. Or my diet is completely ruined. So you have a bit of chocolate or something you shouldn't have, and you say to yourself, my diet is completely ruined. Well, it isn't. You've just had something you probably shouldn't have had, but what about the 95% of other foods you've had that were good? Or what about this one? Nobody likes me, I'm stupid. Again, so situation is there was probably someone who took a dislike to you, and so you then, based on that one experience, come up with this idea that I'm stupid and no one likes me. Okay, so you can see what's happening here. One experience or one little part of life is creating some kind of belief that's very black and white. It's either very good or very bad. So what's the reality? How do we overcome this? Well, I think we need to think that the reality is really more shades of grey. It's not black or white. It's not good or bad. Everything's kind of moderate. Not a lot of the time things are pretty average. They're just average. They're not really good or bad. They're just normal. And a good thing that you can do with yourself when you hear yourself these statements is just say the word really. So if someone says I'm a total loser, say really. Okay, so you'll probably find this is a good one to actually start doing with other people. You may not want to actually say the word really, but when you hear other people say that, just in your mind say really, and then start to pick up your own thoughts as well. Or when you say something like I'm a total loser, just in your mind say really, and then see what answer comes up. And often the answer will come back, well, I'm not really, I'm good at this, I'm good at these parts of my life. It was just this one specific situation. Okay, the second cognitive distortion or thinking trap is catastrophizing. So this is imagining the worst case scenario with no risk assessment. Okay, so with no idea of how likely that worst case scenario is. And it also, part of that as well, is that you also believe you can't cope with it. So it's two things. It's imagining the worst, and it's that feeling that you won't be able to cope with the worst if it did happen. It's also called magnifying, because you're magnifying errors, fears and imperfections. Okay, so let's give you an example. You're at home and you hear your mum and dad arguing. So say you're a child, you hear your mum and dad arguing, and so you just say they're going to get a divorce. Okay, that's the worst case scenario. So you hear them have an argument and you immediately come to the conclusion they're going to have a divorce. So you're magnifying, you're catastrophizing, and if they have a divorce, you're not going to be able to cope with that. Okay, so this is something that can then lead into other limiting beliefs in adulthood, some of that kind of experience. And look, a lot of us have probably had that experience of hearing our parents arguing at some point when we were children. Another example could be if I fail this test, my life is over. So if I fail this test, my life is over. Well, probably not. I've failed tests in the past and my life has continued, and sometimes it's actually been a good thing. So how you really get around this is really just look at reality. Okay, firstly, ask yourself, how likely is this event to happen? In a lot of cases, very unlikely. And if it did happen, you'd cope. Think to other things that have happened in your life that have been unexpected, and you've coped. Okay, so that's the key thing with that one. The next one, the third one, the third thinking trap is negative brain filters. So this is about noticing and focusing on negative experiences only. Now you begin to notice that some of these thinking traps are quite similar. They're subtly different, but there's definitely overlaps between this one and the all or nothing thinking as well. So this is about ignoring positive experiences, i.e. what's going well, and focusing more on the negative experiences. So let's give you an example of this one then. So going back to that idea of like eating a bad food, you focus on that bad food that you ate, but you ignore all the good foods that you were also eating. Or let's say you're playing a sport such as golf and you flunk a shot, and then you spend the rest of that golf round focusing on that flunked shot, taking no notice of all the really good shots that you've already done. So it's just focusing on one negative thing, when in reality there's lots of positive experiences and sort of average experiences that have happened as well. So how do you get around this? It's really a case of consciously being aware of it and then focusing on the complete experience. So noticing the flunked shot, but also just noticing all the other shots that went well as well. And I think another way of doing this as well is to focus on gratitude. If you start thinking about how well things are going, how well this experience is going, life in general, then you're focusing on what is working in your life and you're focusing a lot less on what isn't working in your life. So that's a really good one for the negative brain filter. Okay, the next one, number 4, is mind reading. So this is assuming you know what others are thinking about you, but there's actually no real evidence to back that up. So someone might say something like, I know she hates me. And you're basing that on maybe some kind of facial expression or something like that, or something they've said, but you don't really know what's going on in their head. You don't know that that morning when they said something about you that you didn't like, that they had had an argument or something else going on in their life. You don't know that that person might be dealing with something quite traumatic inside. Maybe they're dealing with an illness or something like that, or there's lots of different things that can be going on in that person's mind. So another example could be, others think I'm stupid. Okay, so again, it could be just based on some comment that maybe one or several people have said that makes you get that feeling. Or another good one is, I know they are talking about me behind my back. Okay, so you've probably heard people say these, or maybe you've said these to yourself. So you've got to remember with these that you're not really a mind reader. No one can read someone else's mind. You can get an idea of what they're thinking, but the only person who knows what that other person's thinking is themselves. And what you can do is test the evidence. So when they say something like that, ask yourself, well, what else could that mean? If someone says something negative about you, what else could that mean? They're having a bad day, they're not feeling great themselves, maybe their self-esteem is quite low. Others think I'm stupid. Look at people who maybe think of you in a different way. And just notice how is it that you're thinking that they make you think you're stupid. What is it about the way they're saying, they're thinking, the way they're coming across to you that makes you think that? So the next one is called the fallacy of change, and this is about expecting other people to change to suit you. Okay, this is about wanting other people to change, basically, so you can feel happier or some kind of positive emotion. So there's an underlying belief behind this, that your happiness depends on someone else or on something else. So the classic example where this comes out is, if you loved me, you would fill in the blank. Okay, so an example could be this: if you really loved me, you wouldn't spend your Saturdays on the golf course. Something like that. I'm sure there's many other examples. And you've got to remember here that happiness is not dependent on other people. And you've also got to remember here that other people can't change. Well, they can change. Think about yourself. Think about how easy or difficult it is for you to change in your life. Now, I'm sure there's probably areas in your life where maybe you've changed quite easily. Maybe there's other areas in your life where it's been really hard to change. You know, you've done a few things, but it's really hard to shift that. So if some aspects of your life you find it hard to change, well, it's probably pretty likely that other people find things hard to change as well. So any kind of idea that someone else has to change in some kind of dramatic way for you to be happy is just not something that's within your control. Okay? So what you want to do with this one is really just know that your happiness is not dependent on others. It depends on yourself, and it depends on the decisions that you make each day. Now the next one is fortune-telling. So this is predicting that things will turn out badly. So an example could be, I will never be able to change, or I know I'll mess up my interview, or no one is going to talk to me at this party. So we're basically telling ourselves what is going to happen. We're trying to predict the future, but we're predicting the future in a very negative way. Now the reality is we don't know. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what actually is going to happen. And thinking about it happening in a bad way is likely to increase the likelihood that it will happen in a bad way, but we actually just don't know. So it's actually pretty pointless to think in that way, because we just don't have the evidence. We can't mind read in that way and predict the future. So the way around this then is to really ask yourself, what's the evidence? How do I know that I'm going to flunk this interview? How do I know that I'm never going to be able to change? And when you start to ask those questions, often you'll find that the evidence behind that is actually quite flimsy, and actually that will help you change your beliefs that you can do those things and think of those things in different ways. So the next one is always being right, and this is a really important one in relationships as well. Always being right is when you're constantly proving that your thoughts and actions are the correct ones. You're going all out to prove that you're right, even if you upset others, especially the ones you love. So it's about, being really blinkered about, I know I'm right, I'm going to prove I'm right, and I'm going to do this at all costs. And it's also about, thinking and saying that, I know I'm right, and I really don't care what you think. So I'm taking no interest in the other person at all. And the great question to ask in this situation is, would I rather be right, or would I rather be happy? So would I rather be right, or would I rather be happy? And when you ask that question, it's a pretty easy decision. Most people would rather be happy than be right. And this is an absolutely vital one in a relationship, in an intimate relationship. When I got this, the number of arguments that I had with my wife dramatically reduced, because I just realized when I'm having an argument that I don't need to prove I'm right. It's actually just going to cause more harm to do that. So I can just let go and be happy. And also noticing that in an argument situation as well, the other person is not often thinking straight themselves because they're stressed. So actually accepting that whatever comes out of their mouth is not always completely what they're really thinking. It's just what they're thinking, their brain is thinking at the moment, is valuable as well. So if you don't, if you really want to be better in your relationships, your intimate relationships, or just at work and those kind of things, this is a really good one to let go of. Would I rather be right, or would I rather be happy? Okay, so the next one is labeling. So labeling is when you describe yourself, i.e. your sense of identity, with a single negative word. So it could be, I'm stupid, or I'm a disaster. And this is quite a dangerous one, because all your behavior stems from your sense of identity. So if you believe and you feel that I'm stupid, then lo and behold, you're going to do stupid things in different areas of life, because that's how you see yourself, that's how you imagine yourself, that's what your self-image is. And the reality is that we are far too complex as human beings to be summed up in a single word. We're far too complex to be simply I'm stupid or I'm a disaster. And so the way around this is to realize that firstly, and then to choose positive phrases that are believable instead and that are more realistic. Okay, the next one is overestimating. So this is exaggerating the chance that something bad will happen. So it's a little bit like catastrophizing, but it's more exaggerating rather than completely believing. So it's less strong than that. So it's believing that something highly unlikely will happen to you. So for example, if I forget to lock the front door at night, it is very likely that my house will get burgled, even if you live in a low crime area. Okay, so the reality of that situation is actually if you did forget to lock the front door, you'd probably be perfectly safe. Again, I'm assuming you're in a low crime area here. I'm not assuming you're in a very, very dodgy, crime-ridden inner city area. So I'm assuming you're in a fairly safe area here. So what this person is doing is believing that if I forget to do this, that something bad is going to happen, basically. It's almost where the kind of OCD type behavior can stem from. And there's another good example is say, it's very likely that the next plane that I fly on is going to crash. Okay, now the reality is you're more likely to win the lottery than to be on a plane that crashes. But if that person really believes that that plane they're going to go on next is going to crash, well, what do you think is going to happen to that person? They're naturally going to have a really high level of anxiety. I mean, you're going to, because it seems like a really real experience to you. So as I say, it's similar to catastrophizing, but the reality is it's highly unlikely to happen, and if it did, just like with catastrophizing, you would be able to cope. All right, so the next thinking trap is overgeneralizing. So this is making sweeping judgments about yourself based on only one or two experiences. So often with this, you hear the words never or always come up when people say this. So this is not helpful because it only takes a couple of situations into mind and then comes up with a kind of, again, it's a bit like all or nothing thinking, where you take a couple of experiences and then you apply that to all situations and events. So an example with this one could be you flunk a few words in a presentation, and so you then say, I'm never good at public speaking. So notice the word never mentioned in there. Or your boss criticizes you for one specific task that you do, and then you come up with this idea that I always make mistakes. So again, you've just done one thing incorrectly, and you've taken that, overgeneralized that to saying, okay, I always make mistakes. And the way out of that is to, again, just realize that you can't judge yourself on one or two experiences. Again, it's really just a case, again, you see this is similar to some of the other ones here. It's not focusing on the things that are going right. It's focusing on one or two things. And again, that's just not true. That's just not the way that it's actually working for you. All right, so the next thinking trap is blaming. So this is refusing to accept your part in a situation or outcome and instead blaming others instead. So this is about not taking responsibility, and this is a very important concept in self-help, is the idea that you take 100% responsibility for what happens in your life, or certainly for how you react to what happens in your life. Okay, so some examples of this might be, well, it's not my fault that we lost out on this opportunity. This could be in a business context, for instance. Now, the reality of that is it can often take several people for something to go wrong. Okay, I often think of the example of a car accident. Often it takes actually both drivers not paying attention to certain things that causes the accident, and it could even be other factors such as the car as well. And if any one of those factors had not happened, then the accident wouldn't have happened. And I think this can be the case in quite a few things that go wrong in many areas of life, particularly if they involve other people. Is there's actually a number of factors, and it's not all down to you. There's other people that are influenced as well, but you certainly have a part to play in that. So it's just taking responsibility for your part in that situation. So really it's all about just taking responsibility for the outcome, and if it's something that maybe doesn't involve other people, then bear in mind that you can change your approach. So if you do something and it doesn't work, if you don't believe that you have any part to play in that outcome, then you have no power to change your approach and make it work differently next time. But if you take ownership for the outcome, then you can change your approach. You've got control then. You've got the ability to do something different and have a different outcome. So the 12th thinking trap, and the last one, is should statements. So this is when you tell yourself that you should, must, ought do something, or you should, must, ought feel or behave in a certain way. However, this is not how you actually feel or behave. It's just what you think you should be doing rather than really being true to yourself. So the result of this is that you end up being regularly anxious and disappointed with yourself and with others around you because you're not being true to you and you're having an unrealistic expectation. And also all those words like should, must and ought indicate a lack of choice. And when you have a lack of choice, it's almost like someone telling you what to do. And when you start to hear that internal voice saying you should do things and you must do things, then that tends to often sometimes give you motivation to want to resist that in some way and not do it. So I think the way to change this really is just to change your language. So instead of using the word should, use the word could. I could do this, because in reality there is normally a choice, and there's normally a choice to how you feel as well. You could say that I choose to do something. So that's a lovely word. I like that. Again, it's giving you choice. Or I will. So will is a little bit softer than should. It's still indicating that you are going to do it, so there's less choice. But it's a little bit of a softer word to do as well. So that's really how you get around should statements, is to use language that gives yourself more choice and feels more empowering. So these are the 12 thinking traps or cognitive distortions that steal your happiness and success in life as well. So this is all based on cognitive behavioral therapy. You've probably heard of that, CBT for short. And that whole therapeutic model is all around challenging these thinking traps or cognitive distortions. So I've really just given you a little bit of an intro into how you can start to do that for yourself. And cognitive behavioral therapy is something I'll talk about in another video. I think that would be an interesting thing just to go into a bit more depth with. But for now, do look at the ones that you relate to the most and start challenging those, start thinking about those in different ways so that you get more of a realistic view about life, and that will help you be more happy, fulfilled and successful. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, give it a like, and do leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think, especially if you're related to one of these cognitive distortions or thinking traps. And do subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't already, and click the bell notification. That way you get notified whenever I release future videos. And do check out my website. On there you will find the written versions to all these YouTube videos, and also a link to my podcast and social media as well. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I look forward to sharing more great content with you very soon. Bye for now.